Good morning. Welcome to the State Allocation Board Audit Subcommittee's Audit Working Group. Is that right, Bill? That's us. Good morning, everyone. Let's introduce the work group. I'm Letty Boggs with Colby Technologies, and I'm here representing CASBO. Steve, you want to take it?
Steve Inman, OPSC.
Rick Asbell, OPSC.
Shiloh Gorospe from Vavrnik Trine Company, representing independent auditors.
Scott Anderson from the San Joaquin County Office of Ed.
Carolyn Baez with the State Controller's Office.
Arlene Matsura with the Department of Education.
I'm Jeff Becker, representing the County Schools Facilities Consortium.
And I'm Bill Savage. I'm the Assistant Executive Officer for the State Allocation Board.
Okay. We recently had a report to the Audit Subcommittee of the State Allocation Board, and they have sent us back to committee work with tasks in hand. So Bill's going to recap for us that meeting. I went on vacation, sorry. So.
Thank you, Letty. Rick and I are going to tag team just a little bit of a recap. The Audit Working Group reconvened this year after a request from Senator Lowenthal to look at recommendations that have been made by the Audit Subcommittee and adopted by the Board on auditing under the School Facilities Program. And as we began the process, we have been through 4 meetings, I believe, along the way, and come up with a proposed school facility program process that addresses a number of concerns about accountability, timing, and streamlining of audits for the school facilities program. And maybe I'll ask Rick to just recap the 3-part approach that had been developed prior to the audit sub meeting.
So essentially, we were looking at the 3 phases. We're looking at kind of an upfront accountability system, which would be what we would call the incremental compliance check. That's everything prior to about 18 months. And then after that, you have the second phase, which is OPSC when they're doing their closeout review. But off of that is a kind of a parallel track, which would be a local entity potentially or an outside entity doing an external audit. And that's where I think the focus is here. We've had a lot of discussion with the audit work group and the audit subcommittee about what would be those options. Would it be a K through 12 type function? Would it be a Prop 39 type function, and so forth? So we're appreciative of the fact that we've got speakers today to talk to that Prop 39 option, and that's what we've got.
Well, and when we made our presentation to the audit subcommittee and the legislative members and Kathleen Moore from Department of Ed, we had basically been talking within the audit working group about using the education audit, the annual district audit, and going through the education audit appeals panel process, developing the audit guide. When we got to the audit subcommittee, we heard loud and clear that they wanted us to consider the use of Prop 39 audits as a vehicle for school facilities program audits. And I'm going to quote the chair, Senator Lowenthal, who said, "The issue doesn't appear to be resolved. Go back and struggle." And so, so that's why we're here today. We're here today because we've been asked to look at Prop 39 audits as a potential vehicle for external audit functions for school facilities program projects. And so what we've got today is a panel. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you.
A panel of 4 experts in the field, and they are going to make presentations to the work group. And so after, I think in terms of what I was thinking was maybe if you have specific questions for each of the presenters while they're going through their presentation, why don't you ask them then? But I was anticipating that they would take about 15 minutes each, and then we would have a time for dialogue after that where the work group could talk with the expert panel members, and we could see what some of the issues are and how we deal with some of the issues and begin to define them in terms of whether we can proceed with this approach. There'll be a time for public comment, and then hopefully we can develop an outline of where we want to go from here in terms of the audit working group, whether we need to update our recommendations, look at this further, what the main issues are, et cetera. So I'm going to ask our first two panel members to come up, and Marilyn Cleveland from Dennis Walliver Kelly and Anton Young here from California League of Bond Oversight Committees, CalBOC. And Marilyn is an attorney, and I've asked her to go first and talk about the legal and statutory regulatory framework for Prop 39 audits. And there are handouts in the back from both of these panel members. So, Marilyn, take it away.
Bill.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Pull that mic down a little bit closer to you. Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to meet with you and discuss this very interesting issue. I was asked to talk about the legal background of Prop 39. I've been an attorney for over 20 years with Dennis Walliver Kelly, representing school districts and community college districts, and actively have represented many school districts going through the Prop 39 bond process, from the very earliest ones who were sort of paving the way and operating a little bit in the dark, all the way through currently when there's more guidance out there as to exactly how the Prop 39 operates. Prop 39 was approved by the voters in the year 2000. It amended the California Constitution, Articles 13 and 16, to provide for a lower voter threshold for local school and community college bonds. Instead of approving bonds by the traditional 2/3, which was still available, school districts and community college districts could approve bonds by 55%. And it provided for a slightly expanded use of those bonds. In order to convince the voters that this was a good thing, there were several accountability measures that were built into Prop 39. Those included the requirement that a district obtain an independent financial audit and an independent performance audit. But those were only two of the requirements, and they meshed in with several other requirements. Some of those requirements that are in Prop 39 itself are limitations on the uses of funds to school facility uses. They cannot be used for teacher or administrator salaries or for other operating expenses. Provision that the bond itself has to have a project list that identifies the specific projects that will be built with the bonds. A certification by the governing board that it has evaluated safety, class size reduction, and information technology, and of course the performance and financial audits as being two of those requirements. Along with the Prop 39's approval by the voters, the legislature in the same year passed AB, or adopted AB 1908, which implements and expands on the requirements under Prop 39. And under AB 1908, districts are required to have a citizen oversight committee that must review the audits along with fulfilling several other purposes. One of the early questions when Prop 39 passed was, well, what is a performance audit? Nobody in local government really was familiar with this vehicle. Financial audits, yes, every school district gets an annual financial audit, and so many school districts have included the audit of Prop 39 funds in with the rest of their financial audit. Others do it as a separate financial audit in conjunction with a performance audit. But performance audits were new, and the only guidance we were able to find was from the federal government, which was already using a process of performance audits on some of its projects at that point. The statute says that the purpose of the performance audit is to determine if the funds are being used for the authorized purposes. So it is a fairly discrete function that the performance audit is supposed to perform under Prop 39. The audit function has continued fairly unchanged since the time of Prop 39's adoption, but there has been more clarification on some of the other requirements. The audit function ties in with the oversight committee, which is required, and one of the functions of the oversight committee include to inform the public concerning the expenditure of bond revenues, to actively review and report on the proper expenditure of taxpayer money for school construction, and to advise the school district whether a district is in compliance with Prop 39. Along with that, their activities include receiving and reviewing the annual independent performance and financial audits. So while the audit is obtained, the audits are obtained by the school district itself, they are to be provided to the oversight committee and become information available to the oversight committee in fulfilling its function. Along with reviewing the audits, that committee is allowed to inspect school facilities and grounds where projects are being performed, to receive and review deferred maintenance proposals, plans, and reports, and to investigate a number of mechanisms to determine whether Prop 39 funds are being used as efficiently as possible. Along with the existence and the creation of an oversight committee and the audits and some of the other requirements, Prop 39 also created a new cause of action, which allows any citizen who is paying taxes within the district to challenge a district that they believe is not appropriately using Prop 39 funds. So as you can see, the audits are part of a whole mechanism that works together. Since the passage of Prop 39, there have been a couple of amendments that have affected it. In 2010, Senate Bill 1473 created new statute 17286 of the Education Code, which requires that the audits comply with the federal government auditing standards that are prepared by the Federal Comptroller General. So as you can see, it was 10 years before we obtained any real official guidance on the criteria and the methodology for the performance audits. And then in 2011, Senate Bill 423 amended that statute to require that the audits be submitted to the Oversight Committee by March 31 of the year following the fiscal year covered by the audit. So in other words, for each July through June fiscal year, by the following March, those audits need to be provided to the Oversight Committee for their use in preparing the reports that they are expected to prepare annually as well as at the end of the bond program.
Thank you. So any questions or comments about the legal framework from the working group? I have, so if we're going to put this in the context of considering Prop 39 audits as a vehicle for SFP audits, is it performance audits, or is it fiscal audits, or is it a combination of the audits that are performed under Prop 39 that would be used? I'm just posing that for everybody, and for Maryland too, but because I can't quite tell which one would be most appropriate in terms of the kind of scope that we might be looking to audit with the use of this vehicle. Do you have a thought on that?
Well, I do have a comment. One of the differences between Prop 39 local bonds and state funding is that the state funding is given project by project. So you're dealing with one project, whereas Prop 39 is dealing with an entire bond program, and there was more concern, I believe, that there needed to be vehicles for establishing that the funds were really going to be used for the projects that were included on the bond project list, because over the period of time, the life of a bond, it's possible for other needs to come up or needs to no longer be the same, and so it became more of an issue of making sure that the funds were actually used for authorized purposes.
Shiloh, did you have a comment?
Well, I wanted to piggyback on your question a little bit because what I'm trying to gain clarity on is, are we looking at a proposal that would take Prop 39, modify that language to include OPSC audits, or would it be we would use the framework of Prop 39 to create a separate legislation for an OPSC audit? I'm trying to understand if they're going to be combined or if they're going to be separate.
If I told you I didn't know, would you believe me? But I think what if I'm understanding the direction that we got from the audit subcommittee, I think that the audit subcommittee saw the Prop 39 audits as a function that districts were already engaged in, that the school facilities program scope of audit at some level, I don't know what that is yet, could be included in that process. So trying to create a streamlining. If a district's already engaged in that process, adding some additional scope to that so that we're not creating another step of an external audit for school districts.
My biggest concern with that would be that not all districts have a Prop 39 audit.
There we go, number one, okay.
And therefore, how would we deal with an OPSC audit for those type of districts?
And I think that's a question we're going to have to keep coming back to. So, and not to foreshadow too much, one of the conversations that Marilyn and I had as we were talking this through is so if you took a district or a county office of education that didn't have a Prop 39 bond, could you create an audit vehicle that involved the similar characteristics of a Prop 39 audit?
I think if you had, you can have a performance audit on anything. A school board can cause a performance audit to be done at any time on any program. That's the nature of that vehicle, as it can be very targeted. And the board has that authority to cause that to be done at any time. So I agree they don't have them. I'm not at all convinced that it's the right vehicle. I'm not quite there
Sure.
yet.
No,
but I do see that you could easily have a performance audit for the purpose of review of SFP expenditures. I mean, that, I think the vehicle would easily fall within that, the GAGOS, the Government Accounting Manual guidelines for performance audits.
So, and do we think, so I think we should just, as we go through all the panelists today, let's keep coming back to that question. How do we deal with that issue? That's a fundamental issue here, which is not everybody has a Prop 39 bond or the need to do that audit. A second one to me is I think we still need to answer the question or try and grapple with, is it a performance audit function or is it a fiscal audit function or is it both, some combination of that?
Just to comment on that latter piece I think it will depend on what OPSC wants. And I think, and I'm not going to put words in their mouth, but from all the discussions we've had so far, I'm envisioning that they're looking for performance or compliance. The financial statements, similar to the bond, are already included in the fiscal audit of a district. It would be easy to do a fiscal audit for that as a separate fund if that was what OPSC wanted, but
I think more toward the compliance aspect is, I think, what we're looking for.
I think we all have an underlying interest that the money that the state puts out there gets used for the purposes of the state bond. I mean, we all have an interest in having that money be appropriately allocated. So I think that's the overarching objective, right, is that that money is going for the program purposes,
And so
I agree.
issue by issue.
if it was a compliance, so let me just make sure. So one of the things we hear that OPSC wants to look at is, for example, that you would take expenditures under the SFP program and you would say, are these allowable expenditures or not? And is that typically done in a performance audit setting? That's a compliance piece? Okay, because I'm not, this is not my area of expertise.
And I think we might as well put it out there that this is, in a sense, a broad category that OPSC and districts have struggled to define. If we go back historically to the program before this one, there was a list we got, and we all struggled with the fact that they put things on the list and it didn't get updated, and we don't buy record players anymore. Now we buy boom boxes, and now we don't do that. And so having a defined list was problematic. So in the new program, my recollection is we said, look, it's a grant program. We need to outfit the school. These are the things, and districts had a measure of discretion as long as it was defined in the project scope. And we even struggled with that. There were times when OPSC would push back and say, why do you need 12 computers in a classroom? Wouldn't 5 or 6 be right? Or are you just spending out the money? And we had those conversations. And that, I mean, it's appropriate to have a little pushback and conversation because you have to be able to have some legitimacy to what's being allowed and what are the expenditures. Although at the time it doesn't feel very, it's challenging. So that's kind of what the history of this is, and I just have a concern that as we go forward here, we not hamstring districts back to a very highly defined criteria that doesn't allow for different instructional programs and needs within different types of schools. So,
Good point.
Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Letty. I agree with what you said there. I also want to, what I'd hope to hear from the presenters today, and maybe some of the folks that are involved in Prop 39 performance audits and financial audits a bit more, is how much of the scope that we're talking about with an OPSC audit to determine compliance with the OPSC regulations already is happening in a Prop 39 audit. In other words, the subcommittee directed us to look at Prop 39 audits as a way to find efficiencies and not duplicate work. So I'd like to hear, are there efficiencies, or are we adding additional scope to a performance audit? If there's too much scope being added, to me it seems that the efficiencies might not be there. You could add scope to a Prop 39 audit, or you could add it to your education audit. Are we going to realize the efficiency that we're looking for, all framed against the concept that we're going to have to find another vehicle to meet these same rules for districts that don't have Prop 39 bonds and don't have those audits?
Kathy.
I like the idea of just being able to hand over my performance audit and my financial audit to OPSC and say, here you go. I mean, that's too simple, but that would be fantastic. So following along those lines, my local performance audit is going to strictly be looking at my bond expenditures, not just the state's share of bond expenditures. So there's going to have to be, by default, a different an added component to a local, if we're going to go this route, a local Prop 39 performance audit, because right now, an audit that we would conduct on my local bond wouldn't satisfy 100% of the requirements that OPSC is looking for. But I like the idea because we're already kind of doing a lot of it. So I do think that it's worth exploring in terms of adding another component to that performance audit so that it does meet some of the requirements from OPSC, and then somehow figuring out a way to, like Jeff is saying, when you don't have a Prop 39 bond or your financial hardship or whatever it might be.
That
Okay.
kind of brings up a Maryland question, if I could.
Sure, go ahead.
Marilyn, we have gotten the question many times from districts that just wanted to present to their oversight committee the bond expenditures, but not the component of the state. And we're in this effort of bifurcating that information so that they had expenditures assigned to the bond funds and expenditures assigned to the state funds. And just as a matter of policy, we always encourage them to keep it whole project because it conveys a broader sense of information, both in their oversight committee work and at OPSC, to keep them all together both ways. Is there legal, where does that come down as far as, does it not really define that, or is there some legal piece we need to understand in that?
There's not clear legal guidance as to whether the performance audit is required to cover the entire project that has some Prop 39 funds or only the Prop 39 portion of those, of the project or projects. But like you, we have encouraged districts to look at the whole project, and it's very difficult, I think, to do a performance audit that's only covering, you know, a portion of the project that is paid for out of a particular part of the funds and not the portion that's coming from other funding sources, when in the end what you end up with is an entire building with furniture and equipment and whatever.
Okay.
So, yeah, Scott.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm here today, representing Fisco, sitting in for Andrea. So first thing out of my mouth this morning was a mistake. So I apologize for introducing myself incorrectly. But I would hope that and I guess I also apologize for not being completely up to speed on all the meetings that have taken place up to this point. But I have tried to catch up, and I would just hope that as we go through the meeting today, that we keep an open mind about the best place for the school facilities project audit to be, and not necessarily look for a way to force it into the Prop 39 bucket. I was a CBO prior to being in facilities, and just from what I know about this process is that it's not clear to me where the efficiencies lie, whether it be within the scope of what today is defined as the Prop 39 performance and fiscal audit arena, which there seems to be a lot of disparity in terms of what those audits contain, at least from what I've read and understand and experienced. And within the fiscal audit, I mean, it's pretty broad and deep, right, that school districts go through in county offices as well. So everybody has that audit. It's broad and it's deep, and it involves Fund 35 already. And so I would just hope that we would sort of let sort of this thing unfold and decide where best to put it, hopefully with all those in mind. And again, Bill, I apologize if I'm going down the wrong road here, but I just felt like I needed to say that. Thanks.
Oh, I think it's important to say. Shiloh?
I just wanted to comment briefly on Jeff's comment earlier, where could we get some of the efficiencies if this were to be consolidated. And definitely there's going to be an expansion of the transactions that are being looked at for compliance, as Kathy mentioned. So you're not going to have savings there because we're talking about adding an additional element of a whole new fund to the audit. Where you would have some efficiencies, though, would be in the portion of the audit with which you're, and I think that when we listen to Christy White talk, we'll hear a little bit about this, but when you're having to understand the process, understand the internal controls, you do that as part of the audit, the performance audit. You understand how the facilities department works, how transactions are processed. If your facilities department and the controls associated with that department are the same for the building fund as they are for the OPSC or county school facility fund, then you will gain efficiencies because the procedures will be the same and you have to only document that one time. So that it could be an element of efficiency that's gained. That is also done as part of the financial audit, and so it would happen there as well. So if you're talking about overall, there's going to be more testing involved. No matter where you put this audit,
It's true. I mean, that
the
would be
efficiencies will be on the internal controls
And there's
piece of it.
now with OPSC, so.
Okay, let's move on to our next presenter. That was great. Thank you, Marilyn. Anton? Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Anton Young here. I'm the executive director and co-founder of the California League of Bond Oversight Committees. We're an all-volunteer organization. Our mission is to train the some 5,000 citizen bond oversight committee members in California in some 450 bond oversight committees. I was formerly the co-chair of the West Contra Costa Unified School District Audit Subcommittee and served on that committee for 3 years. I've worked with a number of CBOCs throughout California on various issues. I also had the distinction of being my term not being extended by the West Contra Costa Unified School District. I was recommended for extension by our local taxpayer association, and I was rejected because I was too disruptive on the committee. And I didn't appreciate that the committee is a family, and a family gets along and don't ask questions that can raise concerns. I'm currently the business manager for a charter school in Richmond, California. Previously, I was deputy superintendent and business manager in San Francisco Unified School District, Yonkers, New York, Berkeley. I was director of finance with Mayor Gibson in Newark, New Jersey. I was a controller in Anchorage, Alaska. So I bring the perspective of a citizens bond oversight committee. And we support the use of the Prop 39 performance audit process for the school facilities. In my judgment, the Prop 39 independent audit is the single most important tool that a citizen bond oversight committee has to carry out their independent function. As you know, most school districts do not have general funds to support bond oversight committees. So the only support, the only resource that these committees have, which are all volunteers, in my view, is the performance audit, which is paid for from the bond program. And as Ms. Cleveland indicated, the standards for performance audits were not defined until recently, and this is the famous yellow book, which is the controller's guidelines. The first audit under the new standards were for the fiscal year ending June 30, 11. Those audits are due to the CBOCs by March 31 of 12. So that's the first round of performance audits under the new standards. And I would agree with some of the comments by the committee members that those performance audits, by and large, in my view, were ineffective and did not follow the standards in the yellow book. As part of our CalBog activities, we're doing a survey of the performance audits June 30, 11. We picked a statistical sample of 170 districts. And I have to tell you, in order to even get copies of those audits, we've spent over 200 hours just locating and getting copies of those audits in order to do this survey. Because there's no one place where you can get these. And even when you go to the district, they're in various parts of their websites. And these are preliminary results. We haven't completed this study. But based on the 170, 5 districts never even did an audit. 5 districts didn't respond even after we made repeated requests, including California records requests. 28 of the districts, in our view, the opinions did not conform to the yellow book. So that's a total of 38 districts, or 22% of the 170 that we sampled either did not perform the audit or didn't do it to acceptable standards in our view. So we think that using the performance audit and having the State Allocation Board use it for their purposes has a number of advantages. Firstly, as we understand it, you're actually not doing audits at this point. As I understand it, you're doing desk reviews. I think that this would provide an annual audit, which would address some of your issues and would reduce the current costs that you have in your reviews. Secondly, and I think most importantly, I don't see a difference between Prop 39 bond monies and state monies. I think the objective, and certainly the objective of the CBOC, is to spend those monies in the most efficient, cost-effective manner. And I would argue that having your audit combined with the performance audit gives an opportunity for both the districts and the state to do that. Thirdly, I think it provides an early warning of issues in regards to your own school facility program compliance issues. And importantly, I think it provides additional information for the Bond Oversight Committee in that it broadens the scope of the audit, so it helps them to accomplish their roles. I have 8 recommendations. First, that the State Allocation Board undertake the responsibility of providing oversight guidance and standards in regards to Prop 39 performance audits. There is no state agency that does this. And you heard Marilyn talk about the fact that it took 10 years in order to define what the scope of the audit was. We have seen performance audits prior to this standard that were 1 page. It had the numbers, and on the cover it said performance audit. That does not meet this standard. I think it would be, by having the requirement that you oversee this, at least somebody knows that it was done and it was submitted. My second recommendation is that we include the audit compliance requirements for school facility program funded projects in the annual Prop 39 performance audit. Thirdly, I think the vehicle to do this, and it'll speak to some of the issues that you've discussed earlier today, is the annual audit guide, which is prepared by the Department of Finance, Department of Education, and the state controllers. What I would suggest is that that guide be the vehicle to integrate your standards and requirements with the Prop 39 and coordinate it with the Yellow Book, so that then you have a definition of what a performance audit is in accordance with the Yellow Book and would meet your needs and requirements. Fifth, I would recommend that the performance audits be filed electronically. The State Department of Education, just for this audit coming up now requires the auditor to file electronically the audit report. I think that would be a tremendous step forward. The school districts would have to file these audit reports in one place, so I wouldn't have to spend hundreds of hours looking for them. 6, I would recommend that the State Allocation Board receive, review, and accept. And by accept, I mean that somebody looks at them and see if they meet the requirements of the annual guide put out by the Controller of Finance and Education. That's a similar function that the state controller now does. You send an audit to them. If it doesn't meet their standards, they send it back to the auditor. And I think in this way we will have auditors who firstly are reviewed. My understanding is that at this time there's no auditors in California that have had peer review to do a Prop 39 performance audit. I understand there's some firms that are in the process. I would recommend that the CBOC have a role in the selection and evaluation of the performance auditor. So as in their independent capacity that they have that opportunity. And I would also recommend that the CBOC have a role in defining the scope of the performance audit, and that they participate in the entrance and exit conference in their role as an independent watchdog over the expenditure of bond funds.
Thank you. Question. The recommendation number 6 that you have, and actually it's a question for the working group here too, because it's something we've talked about. The way it's stated here is require State Allocation Board to receive, review, and accept Prop 39 audit reports and financial audit reports for non-Prop 39, but it raises the question that I think we've struggled with a little bit here. Whatever audit vehicle we're using, how does it go back to OPSC, which is the staff to the board? Rick, this is partly a question for you too. I mean, you know, we've talked about this in terms of the annual audit, and I think that what I've heard concerns from districts and county offices was they want to make sure that if someone's audited using the outside external entity, whether it's Prop 39 or a education audit, that's not going to be duplicated. That'll be accepted by OPSC, not duplicated. So it raises kind of the question of how you get the information back up to the state if we use an external audit for this function. So anybody?
I have a question. Does the Controller's Office review audits for competency now, or?
Which audits?
Is there a model for this kind of review?
Right. Well, we receive all the audit reports, the independent audit reports for all of the local education agencies in the states, the school districts and county offices of education and charter schools. So we have a desk review process where we go through the audit report and look for certain that they meet standards, and then also that they comply with all the requirements in the K-12 audit guide, and that they've tested all those appropriately.
So the receive, review, and accept kind of criteria is not just a, yep, we got it.
No, definitely. No, it goes through a thorough review, but those are, we only get those that are part of, looking at those that are part of the K-12 audit guide. We're looking at those requirements. So for something like this, that's my question. I'm kind of seeing that there'd be some done under the performance audits requirements, and then some under the K-12 audit guide if they don't have Prop 39.
We don't know yet, but it was just,
know.
it was really a question of how, is there a process, if this were to be something that OPSC received and reviewed, is there kind of a benchmark of process that they could go
that
through
they could
to,
use, yeah,
to know that they're legitimately approaching?
Right. We have a very thorough desk review checklist that we use, so we're looking in detail at the information in the audit report. Again, we're not seeing the support, underlying work,
Right.
but based on the report, we do a very thorough review if the audit report has conveyed the information.
Okay.
In regards to the Prop 39 districts, my concept is that the annual audit guide would be used by the non-Prop 39 districts as part of their annual audit. That way then the same guide is being used for the Prop 39 audits and the non-Prop 39 audits, because it's in the guide, so that you have one guide, and whether if you're not a Prop 39, the regular district auditor uses that. So, I mean, that's a way then that deals with that issue. And I think you get a lot of economies of scale and efficiencies in auditing, because there would be no duplication. Everybody's using the same standard.
So this is a bit new to us. I don't think we've discussed this concept yet in this forum. And I'm looking at your recommendations, number 3 and number 4, that go to what you just mentioned of having the audit guide prepared by the Department of Education and State Controller's Office to include Prop 39 audits. So instead of rolling the SFP audit function into the education audit, we're talking about rolling the Prop 39 function into the education audit, and then you would have one audit guide that would cover all 3 purposes. And I think that's what I heard you say.
That's what this recommendation says, I think.
Yeah, so that's something I don't think
That's
we've
new.
discussed yet. That's new, and
So has that ever come up before?
Nope.
Because we have, I mean, you do have two separate processes. And I know that it used to be agreed upon procedures, which was a lot different than the audit standards they're using now. But, I mean, his suggestion.
I think you're scaring her, right? Yeah.
Well, we have, do they, so right now, the Prop 39 audits, they just go to the Oversight Committee? Do they go to OPSC at all?
No, they go nowhere. No one even knows if they're filed.
They go to the Citizens Oversight Committee and they go to the school.
That's correct. Nowhere
And
else.
I can tell you, as a district staffer that's been audited many times with Prop 39 audits, that we take them very seriously and took them very seriously when we had them and responded to the recommendations and kept them on file, and we knew where they were every minute. But anyway, this is an interesting...
But practice is probably quite
Yes.
broad.
Yes.
Yeah, practices are. So, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, just there definitely is a lack of policing other than the Oversight Committee, and hopefully the Board of Education is aware of the Prop 39 requirements. But if they're not, and if you have, maybe a district who just didn't make the board aware, I mean, believe it or not, sometimes people just aren't aware that it's a requirement. So it can go undetected if there is not an agency overseeing it. So there probably could be a policing problem regarding Prop 39. So, but hopefully most districts are very well aware of the requirement and are following through. But it is in their hands to follow through, or in the auditor. When the auditor is out there and they see the bond issuances, is this a Prop 39 bond? And you realize you need an audit of this, and moving forward and hopefully helping guide a district in the right direction with that respect. I guess my question would be is what would be legally or legislatively, how would you even go about implementing a recommendation such as Anton's regarding rolling all of this up into one? Is it even a feasible option for us to discuss, I guess is really what I'm wondering.
Would you like me to prepare a bill? I say that facetiously, but, the last three bills that have been passed on this subject were co-sponsored by CalBog. The one on the Yellow Book standard, the one on the March 31 date, and the one in regards to terms, which was passed last year. So I would be delighted to do that.
I will say we do appreciate as auditors the clarification on the Yellow Book standards for those Prop 39 audits.
Marilyn, can you...
I just had a comment that in terms of looking at the performance audit, remember that it becomes incorporated into or becomes data for the preparation of the Oversight Committee's annual report. And that annual report goes to the board, and the committee has a duty to make it public with the technical assistance from the district. So, it is something that is supposed to become public, plus documents that are accepted by an oversight committee should become part of their website, so become publicly available through the oversight committee's website, which again, the district has an obligation to provide technical support and making sure there are the resources available for the oversight committee to have a website to make their the documents they receive and their reports available to the public.
Thank you. Can we talk about the audit guide question just a little bit? And I'm not necessarily saying the audit guide that is done by Controller Finance and Education per se, but there isn't really an audit guide process right now for Prop 39 audits, right? And so there would, if we were to do this, if we were to add SFP scope, we would need some kind of audit guide document developed from OPSC, I assume, that then would transmit itself down to the local level and be included in the scope development or scope review of the Prop 39 audits.
Well, and I have a question before you jump in, Arlene, to add to that. Right now, we're following the Yellow Book with very little other guidance than to follow the Yellow Book. We've already talked about OPSC we recommend an improved audit guide there. Is it, and I understand the process we have for the independent audit is rather lengthy. There's a year timeline. It evolves every year to focus on different things, and it's a broad process. I'm wondering if I personally have a question: is that appropriate to the program? When the program comes out and a program has defined definition, what kind of things would come annually as changes in that process? Is it really something that needs that kind of constant redefinition or refocus, or is it more static, or would that really be better to refining process? I really kind of have question about whether we need to go through that layer or not, I guess is kind of my question.
You know, and I think you bring up a good point, and which is why I generally am more supportive of keeping things separate than bringing things together, even though I know a lot of the focus is on creating efficiencies and trying to find ways of, not doing more than we need to. But what ultimately ends up happening in the audit world when we combine too much is similar to the questions that occurred with Prop 39 when it came about. Was the language was vague. What is performance? Okay, is performance with expenditures? And then now, do I just look at expenditures or do I look at these other things? And it just becomes too vague. And so I've always, as an auditor, been more supportive of keeping things separate and providing very good, well-defined scope, objectives, and procedures that need to be performed. And to me, it just provides a lot more transparency and a lot more clarity for those who are doing the audit to understand what it is, OPSC in this case, or whoever you're doing the audit for, what it is they want, and that we can provide the right product for that. When you start bringing things together, then a lot of times that gets lost. And so that would be my warning, my caution on a go-forward basis, and why I become more supportive of keeping it as a separate, despite the fact that you're talking about maybe less efficiencies if you do it that way.
We didn't mean to put you on the spot, Arlene, and perhaps Kirsty's testimony will add some light to this as well. But
I'm not sure what you're really asking. But definitely, if it goes through the annual audit process, everything is much more defined. I mean, the audit procedures and everything, it's predefined, and the districts know what they're going to be audited for prior to the start of the fiscal year. So that part, I mean, it sounds like some of the Prop 39 audits are all over the board. It just depends on what the auditor feels like doing. But in OPSC, you don't get any of those audit reports. What if there's like a really big problem in one of those? Is that ever brought to your attention?
When we do our planning, when we're doing reviews on projects, we'll ask for any kind of background information and so forth. But yeah, that's something we have to actively ask for. We don't actually get it sent to us.
I think it is in the Oversight Committee's purview to focus the performance audit, and we have districts where it's a highly defined document, rigorous process, and we see districts where it is not.
So if a performance audit, if an auditor came in and said, well, they had a significant amount of expenditures that weren't appropriate, then what happens? Is it the oversight committees that they go and see to make sure that the district journalizes that and makes corrections?
Those reports also go to the Board of Education for approval. So I do believe that the board would request action for follow-up.
Much like this committee, CBOC deliberates a lot but doesn't have the authority to take action with the district.
Well, certainly in the annual audits, there's a process already in place that if there's an audit finding, it has to be resolved by either the county office or the Department of Education.
In my district now, my new oversight committee is very desirous of having separate auditors from the district's auditors. They want their own, and they want RFQ their own. They think that there's too much the potential for too much. A firm is hired to do the financial audit, and oh, by the way, just do this real quick Prop 39 thing, and get your page as you were talking about, Anton. So there's some, and I know that's in some of the regulations for the CalBOC guidelines too. So I do have a bond oversight committee that is desirous of having a separate auditor, which might make it easier to package this thing.
I would agree with that, and the reason I would agree with that is because under the Yellow Book, the auditor is supposed to have expertise in the area they're auditing, and I would submit that most CPA firms that are doing performance audits in California do not have the expertise called for in the Yellow Book in terms of construction management, review of bids, review of plans, and so on. And I think when these firms go through the peer review, in order to be accredited as a Prop 39 auditor, that'll change, but that's going to take some time. See, I would submit that what we should have is similar to what the controller has. They have a list of approved auditors. You can't go out and just pick an auditor. It's got to be on the controller's list. And I would submit we should have a list of auditors who can do Prop 39 audit, who have gone through the peer review process for Prop 39 performance audits, because they are very different from a financial audit.
Bill, I'm a little concerned with time.
Yes, in fact, why don't we take a,
Thank you.
thank you so much, take a 5-minute break, and we'll bring the next 2 panel members up. I think we are. Miss Allen is back. And
Okay.
Kathy, why don't you introduce yourself?
Since we missed you,
Kathy Allen, I am with San Juan Unified School District, and I represent CASH.
thank you. And our next 2 panelists are Christy White with Christy White Accountancy, and she has with her Ben Levitt, her associate, and Michael Bishop is with Santa Ana Unified School District, CBO there. We appreciate you coming and sharing your expertise. So,
Why don't we have Michael go first, okay?
Morning. Thanks for allowing the opportunity to participate. First half of this was very interesting. I have not really been following the issue. Was asked to come up and give the perspective of a school district practitioner, I guess you could say, on the business side. By way of introduction, I've worked in all aspects of the facilities program with the exception of being in one of the state agencies. Worked in LA County Office of Education for about 10 years, did audits there internally, and for the last 3 years or so, 4 years or so, actually did expenditure reviews for the production of payments at the county office level. Worked for a couple of years with a CPA firm not represented in the room, and have been a chief business official for approximately the last 17 years in three different school districts, all of which that have participated in the state's facilities program in whatever iteration it was during that 17-year period of time. So my perspective on the issue certainly is a little different based on the conversation that I heard this morning. But from my vantage point, I see at least a duplication of effort, if not a triplication or quadriplication, if that's a word, of effort. Every expenditure that occurs is reviewed by a county office of education. Some do it well, some don't. They're audited. There's a single audit. And if it's a Prop 39 audit, there is what is called a performance audit. I don't call it that because I don't think that's what actually occurs. It's more of a compliance audit of what's in the bond language. Is just what the school district achieved over the life of the bond with respect to projects. Did they build the project that they contracted to build, and is it done with some relative cost efficiency? I don't know that that's a performance audit. I don't know if the procedures that get carried out ultimately takes it to that level. I'll leave that up to Christy, and quite frankly, it's up to the arrangement between the school district and their auditors. It is a process that appears to have no rules in terms of OPSC involvement and what gets done with the Prop 39 audit. So it is from a taxpayer standpoint, we're all taxpayers here, from a taxpayer standpoint, looking in from the outside is probably as mind-boggling as school finance is as well. So I can understand the concern to prove to taxpayers that we are spending taxpayer funds wisely, but we're doing it so expensively, and the process should and can change. From my involvement of going through probably 3 or 4 closeout audits in the 3 districts I worked in, closeout reviews. I wouldn't call them an audit because they're really not. Although 100% of the projects in the state aren't reviewed, that is reviewed is 100%. Had to take boxes and boxes of documents up to the former OPSC office, and painstakingly over 3-4 months, that project was reviewed. It was well after the project had been completed, so you have continuity of staff issues. It's over multiple fiscal years in most projects, so you have continuity of document control. What is the purpose? Is the purpose to audit the entire project? Or is the purpose what school districts are used to, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, which is mostly a financial audit, mostly a compliance audit, that there's some reasonability and some certainty, not 100% certainty, but some certainty that what the taxpayer is paying for, the school district delivered. So if I were the king of the day and could say what should be done, I'm not going to have an exhaustive list the prior speaker. Certainly we'd want to eliminate duplication, triplication, or quadrification. Quadrification would be cases where there's a Prop 39 audit, there's a single audit, there's the OPSC review at the end, and every payment I issue, the County Office of Education is looking at. They're looking at whether it was board approved. They're looking at if there is a competitively bid contract or a competitively bid process, if it's professional services in most cases, and that there's sufficient documentation to show that the work that was contracted for has ultimately been done. There is someone within the district that is vouching that that work has been done. So in that case, there are at least 4 independent reviews of some of the work, and at the OPSC level, if that project is selected, all of the work. So I would certainly want some system of reliance on those other 3 professional processes that are conducted during the course of these projects. How that happens, I'll leave it up to the experts of how it happens, but there should be some reliance. Otherwise, why are all those processes occurring if we're not relying on them? 2 of which are conducted by licensed CPAs, right? So we're either expanding the scope of the single audit, and I like that idea better than having Prop 39 audits be the vehicle, because not, as it was said, not every school district has a Prop 39 audit. So it would be easier to use a process that is already cross-agency, which is the development of the K-12 audit guide, whereas there is no guide, as it were, for Prop 39 audits. And then the OPSC review process at the end would be more administrative, looking at areas that those processes did not look at. Certainly those aspects that involve DSA, to the extent that the closeout review gets into the DSA aspect of the interface with the school facilities program. Whatever we do, I would suggest we think very long and hard before we impose it on projects that exist today, and think about it for projects that might exist in the future. And I'll stop and I'll let Christy make some comments.
Do you want to move to me, or do you? Okay.
Go
Well,
ahead, Bill.
So, Michael,
Yeah.
thank you. That was great. So what it sounds like you're seeing the quantification of effort.
I've been through that.
So if we could find a vehicle that was the proper vehicle to streamline, using something that's already in place, and the idea, I think, that we have been talking about with the audit working group has been that there would be an external audit function that would, and during those years when the SFP scope is being audited, that OPSC would not reduplicate that effort, and that just kind of like what you said, that at the end there'd be an administrative closeout, that kind of thing, and or I think we do want to return to the state allocation board and close the project out in some way, but I think all of what we've been talking about is finding a way to do just what you're saying,
Yes.
streamline the effort, incremental compliance, and then get to the end and just have a summary closeout or review that doesn't reopen any of the cans that were looked at before as we go along. So you like the K-12 education audit better because it has a defined audit guide process?
There's an existing structure.
Structure.
And
okay.
that structure existed long before Prop 39 audits came on the scene. The scope of that audit changes with some regularity based on changing circumstances that exist in either program or school finance or controlling regs, laws, or GASBs, if you will, that impose procedures to test certain types of financial outcomes. So there's going to be some change in the audit guide, and quite frankly should. The world is not static. Our world is not static. So we would expect change.
And tell me about the county office audits.
Yes.
And do all districts go through that separately from the K-12 audit?
It is a transactional audit, and it is. If you have familiarity, you can speak to that, Scott. But every county office, much like every school district, operates a little differently. What they seek to review might vary amongst the counties. I can certainly speak in particular detail regarding LA and Orange. I've worked in both, and certainly on the capital work side, public capital project side, all transactions are pre-audited. So they're going to review the controlling documentation before a payment is allowed to be produced.
We work with clients in, I think it's 14 counties. Currently, I would concur that this is a different level of review in different counties.
Yes.
However, it is pretty standard that they are looking at, with respect to 6,000 object code expenditures, which with the exception of furniture and equipment, most of facilities happens in the 6,000s, that most counties, in my experience, audit all or almost all expenditures in that category. So they come up for audit routinely. They want a copy of the contract, so they are auditing that expenditures are per contract.
And in that area, a competitive bidding or some competitive process is going to be required, so they're checking to see if it's advertised, board approved, that there is a contract, and then that payments are made pursuant to that contract. So It's more of a desk audit, but it's transactional.
Yeah, and let me add the
And they hold
interesting
your
thing-
check
Yeah,
while
the
they
interesting
do it.
about this is that it happens before the check is released.
Yes.
Correct.
And so it's not a back-end audit, it's a front-end review of what's happening.
In our
real
business,
time.
it's the only pre-audit we go through.
Is that true for all districts, or are some districts independent and they do their own, and they don't go through the county?
Very
The larger
few
ones?
school districts are financially independent.
Financially,
Very few school districts are financially. LA Unified is not financially independent.
they are not?
Is not.
And I would just add one thing from an audit perspective in regards to these processes is we would call the process you're talking of the county looking at these transactions as part of the internal control structure at the district. And so we do look at that and evaluate that as part of the internal controls when we are making our decision on how to test and what to test.
Interesting. Okay.
And if a district does become fiscally independent, don't they accept an internal audit component? I seem to recall that they
The
have
county
to have
office?
an internal, no, a district that goes fiscally independent of the county office has to accept a internal control burden.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Which,
Thank you.
that makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. All right, Christy?
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm Christy White. I'm the president of Christy White Accountancy. And in our firm, we do, as does Shiloh, numerous bond performance and financial audits, some very large programs. The largest in which we've been involved is at San Diego Unified. And so, so we're here to kind of go over with you, and I have a handout, some talking points on what's involved in doing a Prop 39 audit, and then how we might, fit that, square peg in a round hole, if you will, and where there's similarities, whether there could be efficiencies, and then finally some of the issues that have come to our mind. And I brought with me Ben Levitt today. He's one of our supervisors, and he specializes in the Prop 39 audits as well, so he's like in the trenches every day seeing what's going on and how some of these audit guide standards that might come out could foreseebly be implemented. So with that, just briefly, Marilyn talked about kind of the legal requirements, but when we're doing a Prop 39 bond, we do have to look towards, the Education Code, of course, Article 13A, which is Prop 39, Public Contract Code, and then the specific ballot language in which each district has the authorization. All of the audits are done under governmental auditing standards, and I might add, too, that all CPA firms are licensed, and part of that licensing does include peer review, and peer review does include all of our attestation, all of our audits, which would include the bond audits as well. So they're not excluded from that peer review quality control process. In terms of deliverables, it's been a real learning process with the Prop 39, particularly the performance audit. And financial audit is financial statements. We all well understand that. But what are the requirements for the performance audit? And so you have seen in the past, and you still see today, differences in reporting and deliverables on that performance side. So that's out there. Which I think will be important if this board decides that there's going to be a requirement for audit of the school facilities grants, that you're very clear to the audit community what you expect in terms of the type of audit and the deliverable. So right now we see that there's essentially two major types. One, agreed upon procedures, which is essentially where an auditor is not rendering an opinion, but is performing to specifications set forth by the district, and then commenting on whether, for example, costs are allowable or not. The second is the performance audit, in which there is an opinion rendered. And in the yellow book that Mr. Jung-Her had up here, a performance audit can cover any numerous objectives, anything from efficiency to effectiveness to internal control to compliance. and it can be as narrow or broad. Generally, we view the Proposition 39 audits as being fairly narrow by law, in which we're required to look at whether the expenditures are consistent with the specific projects listed in the bond measure and as identified by the board. However, certain districts want more expansive performance audits to the point of looking at more efficiencies, effectiveness. And I know in our firm, and I just kind of brought a couple of examples, you know, we have kind of the basic bond audit, and then we have the expanded bond audit, and it really kind of depends on what we're asked to do by the Board of Education in terms of that performance audit. We know what we have to do as a minimum, and then beyond that, it's really up to the board. Typical bond audit, though, would include, first of all, making sure that all those bond funds are segregated from other districts' funds in the accounting record, which is also extremely important with the SFP monies. Then we, test internal controls. We test the financial amounts. A lot of scrutiny over expenditures. I mean, that's the heart of a bond audit is expenditures. Are they allowable? Also, public contract code compliance with going out to bid, performance on the bid, change orders, and so forth. We also look at interfund, because that gets into the allowability, particularly if there's borrowings going on with the bond funds. And then we also do site walks just to physically observe that, yeah, there's an asset out there that you're constructing. We see it in the ledger. We see it out at the site. So that's kind of a bond audit in a nutshell. So how might an SFP grant audit be similarly conducted? Well, as an auditor, we need to know what the objective is, what the scope is, and what the deliverables are, whether that's being told to us through changes in the law or through the audit guide, however that communication occurs. As auditors, we have our own professional standards, and once we have that objective and that scope, we can apply our standards to determine the exact types of testing that can and will be done. And to some degree, the audit guide obviously does that as well. But that communication needs to be made, whether, and it gets back to your point, is this going to be a standalone audit, separate from a bond audit, but maybe running simultaneously parallel to it, where perhaps there could be some efficiencies? Is it going to be an opinion embedded in the bond audit that would include the SFP grants, or would it be in the district's audit? And so let's kind of get into that a little bit. First of all, in the district's audit right now, there is no opinion on performance, okay? So if OPFC is desiring an opinion on performance, there is none currently in the district audit. There is an opinion on state compliance, so that could be a place to house, if you will, our opinion. And I do think compliance audits do fall under performance and not financial. So that's one consideration if it were in the district's audit. It could be a standalone audit with a separate opinion just on the SFP grant compliance, or it could be included within the bond audit. If it's in the bond audit, I would think, and this is probably a legal question, but it'd have to be clearly separated, the funds, because I think it's very important that the bond funds are all accounted for to the very last dollar spent and audited, and so no commingling, if you will, of those funds with SFP. So let's see, and in terms of testing, are all the requirements going to be tested, or are some of them? And one thing that hasn't been raised today is the 5006 reports, okay? So, which, to Michael Bishop's point, can be prepared, particularly that final closeout, years after, the project's completed. So, audit could involve kind of a continuous audit where every year the auditor is looking at whatever expenditures are recorded in Fund 35, which is where all the school facilities grant monies have to go. and then make sure that the expenditures recorded are allowable or not, and or the auditors could be asked to audit the 5006 report in the year in which it's prepared. So if we go out there and find you prepared a dozen reports this year and you're the district, then we would audit either all of them or some of them, depending on how those audit guidelines are written. I do think that the audits would be more contemporaneous if you have the external auditors doing these audits rather than waiting until that final closeout done by the state. So that kind of continuous audit, similar to what the county is doing, could be beneficial, could be more efficient. Many of the attributes that we look at in a bond expenditure are similar to those we would look at in the school facilities grant expenditure. However, one thing to consider is that when we audit a bond program, it's kind of a bigger focus. We're really looking, is it allowable under the Constitution and under the ballot measure? And OPSC grants are more detailed from what I can gather, where they're looking at, is this an allowable cost for this particular project? Very project-based. Not that, it couldn't be overcome, but slightly different focus. So anyways, suggestions, I guess, on how to coordinate. We like to audit on an annual basis, fiscal year. And so to the extent that these audits are of expenditures of that current year, makes it easier, I think, on the district and on the auditors, and probably provides you, again, with that more timely feedback. And let's see. So the question really is, again, coming back to what's the deliverable? Do you want a full scope audit, which might even go as far as to include a financial and performance audit over Fund 35? Do you want to limit this audit to just expenditures in the current year? Do you want the audit to cover the 5006 report, and maybe a combination? And in terms of cost and efficiencies, there's definitely going to be increased costs no matter how you slice it, because it's additional work. The level of compliance that I would assume that OPSC is looking for is not being done currently in the audits. So whether it's in the audit guide or whether it's a standalone audit, there's going to be additional audit cost. Is one less expensive than the other? I can't really say, because we don't really know what the final request is. So let's see. Issues. The issue's already been brought up about what about districts that don't have Prop 39 bonds. So we concur that that is something. There would have to be some provision that would also require an audit be done of those districts, or charters might even fall into that category. And kind of the timing, the timing differences are something that we keep kind of coming back to. Bond audits are audited in a fiscal year, 5006s are audited when they're delivered, and so kind of trying to get those all in the same cycle, I think, would be important. So those are all of my talking points. If you have any questions or anything to add.
Thank you. Comments or questions from?
All I would say is, we've been talking a lot about SFP monies, and so we have brought up, and we have talked a lot about the 5006s and imagining that being a component of what those OPSC audits would be. So unfortunately, you guys haven't heard a lot of the information that's been discussed at prior meetings, because the audit guide is one of those. And today we're just trying to get our arms around the idea of not using the audit guide and using Prop 39 as the mechanism, and whether that is or is not the right way. So And just so that you know, we are aware of that, and that is definitely something that's part of the discussions that we've been having, and concerns regarding how do you go about that. The timeliness has definitely been a consideration.
Definitely. So, Ben, did you want to?
Maybe from your perspective,
Yeah.
would there be any efficiencies, I guess?
Yeah, I think Christy did a good job at kind of covering the overview for what a performance audit looks like. And just getting back to kind of the core function of a performance audit from Maryland's definition, really just to determine if the funds are being spent for the authorized function, if they're in accordance with the reasons why voters approved that debt in the case of Prop 39 funds. I think that the goal is very similar for SFP. And I think that a lot of the procedures would be very similar. I think that when you look at things like substantial progress, site visits on an annual basis and an annual look at expenditures are effective ways to monitor that. And certainly when you talk about the final closeout audit of expenditures, I think that getting that annual perspective on both the controls underlying the expenditures and a detailed review of the documentation itself would be very helpful on an annual basis to have. And I think that it definitely would look similar, the SFP audit, if it fell under performance, to how performance audits function in Prop 39 bond audits. I think the big difference from my perspective, and it's been touched on by a handful of people, is the scope, where with a Prop 39 bond audit, you're really focused on the fund or the sub-fund that contains that voter-approved debt, where with the SFP audit, you're looking at a particular application for a particular project. So you're following those projects out individually. And I think it would just kind of need to be determined if the external auditor was going to be looking at 100% of the projects or a sample of them. And then if within those projects that they looked at, if they were going to be looking at 100% of the expenditures, as it sounds like OPSC is conducting now, or a sample of those expenditures under those projects, as we generally do as auditors. We'll get an understanding of the control environment, assess risks, and then use that to plan an audit to be as effective and efficient as possible by getting a sample that is what we hope to be representative of the whole. So just kind of understanding the guidance for that, but definitely I think that the procedures would be very consistent, provided that guidance was there.
I'll say something. What I kind of see here as really the big dilemma is there enough symmetry between what OPSC is going to want and what we're already doing with Prop 39 to allow for them to be merged? And I don't think we even know that yet as a committee, because I don't think we have complete defined audit scope as far as what we would do in an OPSC audit. So I definitely think that might need to be hashed out a little more before we can make a final determination as to whether or not you're going to gain the efficiencies that we want by merging that. Second would be the legislative change that potentially would have to occur in order to allow an OPSC audit to be included in the Prop 39 audit. And would it be both financial and compliance, or would it be just compliance? Because now you would be merging two unlike audits again, because you already have a financial compliance audit on one side, and then you're going to add just a compliance audit on this one particular piece. That doesn't really make a lot of sense for me. I do think this, saying that, and those seem to be two really big challenges in my mind. I'm going back to thinking the audit guide is the better route, but I know we need to tackle this a little bit more. But those are really big challenges, and I don't know how to best answer those challenges. But anyone else have any thoughts on that? Because I do think that it's going to be a huge hurdle to try to overcome.
It really is.
I have a few thoughts, just to kind of clarify what we're weighing. We have Prop 35, 39 audits. I actually wrote 35. Can you believe that? Prop 39 audits and independent audits. We also have the county office audits. So it's truly the quadrupling of all of this that brought us to this committee place, Michael. We as districts felt the same. We know how many times we're getting out that contract and going over what we're complying with in that contract with respect to expenditures on that contract. So in Prop 39 is by program. Independent audit is by project more. No. Fund 35. That's why I wrote 35. Fund 35 is by project, by program. Fund 35 is by program, SFP program. Independent audit is by project or even at the expenditure level. It's not considered with the bond program. But Prop 39 is bond only. So there isn't a one-to-one relationship between Fund 35 and Prop 39. So that's part of the issue. And the independent audit would include all projects. And I know that, and it's been a while since I've been in that seat, but when I was in the seat, if we were in a capital program, there were capital expenditures included in the audit as a routine course of prudent oversight. So I think that's still the case in most districts. The one is performance audit, and the other is fiscal audit. But what OPSC really cares about is compliance. And they're all just a slightly different nuance, I think. Oversight committees, by my experience, really do care about performance. They really do care that we're getting the best efficiencies and things like that that really do fall in the scope of a performance audit and are beyond the scope of what OPSC typically looks at. Once the Prop 39 audit is paid by the bond, the independent audit is paid by the general fund, and I know in the CBO seat that matters. So that kind of leads me to thinking, if the bottom line of what we're trying to do here is to look for effective compliance at least cost and least level of effort, because school districts are asked over and over again to expend time by ever reducing staffs to put compliance in place and to prove that they've complied. And the burden of proof seems excessive in the amount of time, sometimes to the level of project, because the level of documenting this effort is the same on a $3 million project that it is on a $35 million project or a $130 million project. And we tend to apply the same level of oversight to all of them. And we had taken kind of a look at, is it more appropriate to break this into pieces, that OPSA does compliance and they do the early oversight piece, then that leaves expenditure separate. We could handle expenditure separate. Kind of in my mind, there's the contracting element is huge. Public contract code compliance and how we contract for the projects is a very, very important element of this, because that's where the highest risk is, I think, for most districts. Not in the day-to-day compliance with the contract, but in the actual making of the contract. Then there's the expenditure auditing, there's program compliance, and then there's appropriate closeout, because money moves at closeout. And those are kind of the four elements where I think it can be maybe bifurcated in how we do it. So do we want to pull it together? Do we want to pull it apart? I don't know if that recap helped or hurt. Sorry.
It certainly defined, again, the challenges that we face.
So I think I'm still at that point of thinking that, contracting has heavy oversight by the county, and maybe that's the right place for that, because then expenditures aren't going out the door unless contracting is done correctly. And I think the program compliance lying at OPSC is probably the right place, at least in the absence of a good different set of documents.
Could we, before we do sort of some closing things, could we make sure there's anyone?
Oh, I'm not closing. I'm just framing the
You're
conversation.
trying to frame it. Okay, good.
So
I wanted to make sure we asked for public comment.
Because we tend to wander as we have to, because we're struggling. But I think where the expenditure lies is still the most problematic, because I can actually see it lying legitimately in any one of those places.
Yeah, I agree.
So which is most efficient and which is most cost effective? If it can be done well in a compliance compliance review at OPSC, if it can, and that has problems, and we've kind of all agreed there are problems there, and if it could be done in the fiscal audit, and if it could be done in performance audit, or should it be rest solely with the county audit function? I think that's kind of the nature of the most problematic piece of this.
Final, I know you want to move on to public comment. Just to follow up on that, just trying to be sensitive to, as you mentioned, to, the fiscal pressures that are on school districts, and we all know how bad that is out there. And, there's no district like any other district. I mean, they're all a little bit different, as we know. The requirements that we're talking about with regard to the school facilities program audit itself, that's sort of one conversation, right, that you've mentioned that we've all talked about a little bit. How it gets done seems, is a separate conversation or a separate, at least a separate discussion. And I would suggest that, and I'd like to know what the auditors think about this, is if the requirements lived somewhere, let's just say they lived in the audit guide for the SFP audit, but the way that the audit got conducted was left up to the school district, and that whether perhaps it fit better with their efficiencies or whatever their audit involved with a Prop 39 audit that they already had. Maybe that scope could be added to the Prop 39 audit or to their annual fiscal audit and compliance audit. I mean, it seems like there's some smart people down there that can make that decision in terms of efficiency. And again, some don't have Prop 39 audits, all those issues. And so maybe if the requirements are defined and agreed to, and that's a big conversation, and then how it gets delivered and executed, maybe there's more than one way to do that, and that decision might be made best at the school district board level.
Or the county office
or
board
the county
level.
office.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think that deals, so what I heard you say was create the requirements or the audit scope from OPSC for the SFP projects or for that year, and then allow districts or county offices the flexibility. If they have a Prop 39 audit, they could perform those under that scope. If they do it under their regular education audit, they could be performed there. And I'm sure there's probably a million implementation issues, but is that roughly what you were saying? Provide some flexibility at the local level, because that sort of answers the question of what do you do when you don't have a Prop 39 bond. So that's good, Scott. Great, you're hired.
The biggest implementation issue I see with that, and I think it's a good idea in theory, is how do you ensure the deliverable meets the requirement, especially if I'm issuing a report based on Yellow Book standards in compliance with Prop 39, but the OPSC audit requirements don't necessarily tell me exactly what it's supposed to be, but my district tells me, hey, do the audit in accordance with my Prop 39. I'm trying to envision how I understand those requirements and how they embed into an already defined Prop 39 audit with, certain standards, and that to me is a little bit hard to.
I understand. I guess I was suggesting that the SFP requirements for the audit requirements would be separate and apart from a Prop 39 audit requirement definition, right? So I know that still hasn't been completely formulated, but the requirements of that audit, however broad and deep that is, would live somewhere, perhaps in the audit guide, as a suggested vehicle or vessel to hold that requirement. And so, to your point, if the Prop 39 audit was going on in a district, that's sort of one scope, looking at bond funds, right? And then this separate requirement that perhaps lives in the audit guide could be also done as part of that same effort to potentially get some efficiency, or conversely, with the fiscal audit, if there is no Prop 39 audit, that was a suggestion.
I just had a quick comment. I agree with you. I think that's good idea to allow the district the flexibility. My one concern is if they're handled differently. For example, if they're included within the financial and compliance audit through the K-12 audit guide, those reports are coming to the controller's office for review, so we would be reviewing those, but if they're done separately under or along with the Prop 39, we don't see those. So it's kind of like there'd be different levels of scrutiny, and that perhaps that can be addressed, but I think that's something that has to be considered.
And I think you're right. I think part of what Mr. Younghair was speaking to on some level is that, I don't need to put words in his mouth, but I think he was partly speaking to the fact that if you provide additional scope and some level of reporting back for SFP audits, that it increases the overall accountability level and the definition of the Prop 39 audits, which is still being resolved in some ways historically from their beginnings. Anyway, can we see if there's anyone that wants to talk in the public? There may not be.
Do we have anyone in the audience that'd like to speak? You can come up here. That way you'll have a mic. And identify yourself, please. Although you might be considered infamous, Joe.
Thank you. Joe Dixon, Santa Ana Unified School District. We don't have a Prop 39 bond. Not by choice. It was a vote of the board 3-2, so we had to go with a 2/3 vote to get our bond passed. You know, the SFP is at the beginning stages of changing. A lot of changes are going on right now. How the state participates, the amount of state involvement, and what the relationship with the local districts will look like are all under discussion. It could be an opportunity for whatever comes from this group to be incorporated into a new state bond. But the goal, and Mr. Bishop was talking about whatever the quantification or whatever that term is, the goal has to be for school districts simplifying the process of audits and closeout. It's complicated. And the more complicated it gets, the more it costs. The more it costs us, and the more us at the local level, and the more it costs the state. So as you go forward and make your recommendations to the State Allocation Board and others, I hope you keep that in mind, that the program's changing. Let's simplify it. One audit should suffice for the district would be what I would recommend. So thank you.
Good morning. My name is Janet Dixon. I'm with Riverside Unified School District, and we do have a Prop 39 audit, unlike Santa Ana. I really appreciate the committee looking at ways that we can use processes that districts are already familiar with and to consolidate those so that we're not adding yet a completely separate audit onto the many audits, the quadrification, quintrification, whatever it ends up being, that we're already doing. And in Prop 39, of course, many of the projects are the same projects. You know, we've got projects that use a combination of bond money, local bond money, and state bond money. But there are many projects that are different as well. So there's obviously some issues to be worked out with how those would be blended. I don't really understand what the additional scope of the OPSC audit would be on top of that, and it sounds like that needs to be defined a little bit better. But what does seem clear is that there would be additional cost involved no matter which of these processes are adopted. And I'd like to encourage you, it wasn't really clear to me as to when these would go into effect, but I would encourage looking forward to a new program. The current program is winding down. There is the issue of additional cost. The way dollars are coming out of the state program now, because they're being stretched out to match when bond sales take place, oftentimes you are reimbursing a project that's already been completed, and to go back and to add an additional cost at that point can be very problematic for a district and for the state after you've received your full and final funding to help us with that cost in any way. So I would encourage the committee to recommend that anything that you do develop from this is something that is prospective, looking forward to a new state bond, a new program, and implementing it at that point. Thank you.
We don't know our timeline either. We thought we were done a year ago, so.
Thank you,
I
Janet.
think that one's out of our hands, but I understand what you're saying, Janet, and I think in the discussions for a new program, it is appropriate to include this component in that discussion, where we usually don't deal with audit or how we're going to do closeouts until on down the line. We really need to think of it as part of the legislation if they do change the program. That's a great point. Thank you.
So, some closing comments, or does anyone, yeah, Shiloh?
Yeah. Can I summarize where I think I'm
Okay.
at? Hopefully we're all there. It sounds to me, and I know we were asked to come back and discuss the option of going the Prop 39 route for an OPSC audit. And after our discussion, it seems to me that there's a lot of change required, a lot of things we don't have defined as part of that. Just a lot of details not worked out. And if we can work out those details, it's going to require more time, more change. And when we're talking about efficiencies and we're talking about trying to improve process, it just makes more logical sense to me that we would use a route that already exists. And I'm more in favor of continuing down, exploring the path of the K-12 audit guide as a means of incorporating any sort of OPSC Fund 35 auditing. It's a defined process. It's part of the district's current audit. It has oversight. Prop 39 doesn't have the oversight that OPSC would be looking for, so that would have to change. So there's just, it seems to me there's a lot more change that would have to occur to go the Prop 39 route than to go the K-12 audit guide route, and probably more cost involved. So that's my summary of it, and I don't know if that's what the State Allocation Board Audit Subcommittee wants, but they asked us to explore it, and that's how I come away.
Thank you.
This might be more for humor than anything else. It's kind of funny, Shiloh, to hear you say that, because I totally get where you're coming from. From my seat, I'd rather flip it, because I don't have any control over the financial audit, and control is not the right word. I rarely have input, or I'm consulted. Sometimes I'm asked to provide copies of documents, that kind of stuff. But all that happens back at the DO. Whereas a Prop 39 audit happens with me and my staff, and we're the ones that generate the paperwork. So I feel like I'm better able to respond to questions and concerns and comments, and find papers and find contracts and be able to produce the document. So I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I totally get where you're coming from. But I'm looking at it going, wow, okay, something like that would be completely away from my ability to participate. Until it's almost after the fact. Everybody's gotten the call from the auditor, this auditor's here and they need this contract by 2. I'm like, well, I'm sorry, I'm downtown, but so that's just my perspective from a facilities seat. It would be much easier for me to generate all the stuff that I think would go into a Prop 39 audit. So just my
So the facilities perspective is what you're saying.
Yeah, because you're in the entrance interview of the performance audit. You set the timing of the interviews and participation, and that typically doesn't occur with the facility office. It occurs with the CBO, and in some districts, many districts, those are separate offices. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it seems that, the district is the one having the audit, and they could include the facility people as part of that process too, right?
Well, they could, but they rarely do.
I mean, they should.
Yeah.
They should.
Yeah, could, but
They
should.
should.
But they should.
And if something is wrong, then they do. But I go back to my earlier comment on my bond oversight committee wants a different auditor. So, throw that one up for discussion. Then it would be a completely different
I think that is
issue.
a common occurrence where districts would want a separate auditor for the performance audit and their district audit. Separate set of eyes.
Why is that?
Well, what was shared with me with my current Oversight Committee is that, the district gets to hire the district's auditor, and they think there might be a little bit of,
Cozy.
okay, cozy's a good word. Coziness in terms of, and while you're doing the audit for the K-12 financials, go ahead and do this little bond oversight thing, So it becomes an after-the-fact kind of thing. It's a very static document. There's not a lot of two-way. There's not a lot of input from anybody, including the Bond Oversight Committee, in terms of that. So I think, and whether that's happened in my district, I haven't been there long enough to really know that, but I can see that easily happening.
I think, we had talked minimally about district choice before, and I think with the advent of a well-defined document from OPSC about what would constitute compliance and what should auditors be looking for, I have much more comfort in giving it district choice. I think that has an effect. From the CBO seat, I would always prefer to be in an environment where I had a way to keep people competitive in their pricing for me. I want a good job done, but I also want options. If I can go a couple of directions, it gives me the ability not to be saddled with a fee that I might not think is appropriate because I have choice. Now, whenever you have freedom of choice, you have freedom of abuse. I realize that, but that's where there are a lot of mechanisms to keep CBOs accountable to their board and their public. But I tend to fall in the district choice category, but that significantly hinges on someone needs to define what program compliance looks like and how can we audit it. It is what we have struggled with to date with the OPSC audits because we didn't, it goes back to the conversation first day of this committee. If I don't know what an A looks like, how do you expect me to get an A? And don't give me a D if I couldn't have known how to get an A. And it comes back to that. You have to define it for people. And I can tell you my experience with school districts is that most of them are overachievers and they always want to get the A. So they work very hard at following the rules and complying with things and are very, very frustrated when there's no way to get there. And the industry of school districts talking to each other, organizations like CASH and CASBO work very hard to define for people good process to achieve objectives. But it's so essential to have the objectives well defined. So I come back to, I think, a point of saying this would be great to give districts the choice between the two, provided there's good audit document for the program.
I think if you did that, you would still ultimately have to result in what is the final product then, because I don't think you want disparity in the final product. And so if you're talking about district choice, I think all you're really doing is giving the district the choice of, if what you're saying, included in my bond audit, then they're just merging, looking at the documents, but that doesn't minimize or create any efficiencies because they're still going to have to issue a separate report on that unless we find a way of making it work with the Prop 39, which I can't envision that from, what requirements would be created that would allow for two separate requirements to merge into one issued report. I don't see that. And I think the K-12 audit guide might provide a little more consistency in the final report that is issued and then policed.
I think that given a good audit guide, I think districts will find the most efficient way for them and their staffing organization. So what may be most efficient in Kathy's district may be very different from what's most efficient in a school district where the CPO is the facilities department, CBO is the facilities department, and all embodied in one person. And there are many districts that are small, and that is the case, and they rarely do a project. So the right, most efficient answer may be very different in different scenarios.
Oh, and I would agree with that, and I think that that would be how you would organize and do the test work. So I'm referring more to what is the deliverable in the end,
Right.
and that being the document that would lack consistency if you didn't say this is what we want, a yellow book opinion, an opinion that's included in the audit guide. That's what auditors need to know. How you get to that, the districts, I think, can work through all the best ways to provide efficiencies and overlapping testing. 100% agree with that. I still think that you can't provide freedom of choice when it comes to what is the final issued product. That needs to be consistent.
And we've already seen with the performance audits in the broad way they were initially defined, that was problematic. So,
Okay, so.
does that help?
Yeah, it's great. Anybody else have a comment to close? Jeff? Last chance.
You know, I kind of agree with Shiloh on this one that, you know, the issue of choice is really interesting to me, and I think, you know, could merit some more discussion. But having that final product have the level of accountability that we're looking for needs to be defined. So if it's defined, you know, hey, we need a yellow book opinion, and then Kathy says, okay, I've got a Prop 39 auditor and I've got a different financial auditor, they can look and see which one can give them the best price or be most efficient, or maybe they're willing to pay more to have one auditor do it or the other, but it would be the district choice. But again, you know, I really think that defining what the end game is, what the end result is that we're looking for is important.
Yeah, and I totally agree. So what I'd like to ask the working group is, would you be willing to come back for one more meeting? I know, I'm sorry. But because what I think that we owe the board and the audit subcommittee is a report out and so the work that Mr. Asbell and myself have to do to do one more look at this and then come back to you and have try and get a closure on the discussion. It sounds like we need to take some of the things we've heard today about defining the process and the scope and the choice idea, and look at what are, because Shiloh, I totally agree with what you said. Lots of change, I wrote down. Lots of changes required. Lots of details to be worked out. So maybe we owe the board a look at a kind of matrix format, Rick. I'm just thinking out loud here, of what do we see as issues and details that would need to get worked out if we were to try and incorporate SFP audits in Prop 39, if we were to go forward with a choice model where there was an audit guide used, or how do you create the audit guide within the Prop 39 context? So I think we have I can't summarize everything right now, but I think we have some work to do on a staff level to put together a matrix or a summary of some of the issues that would need to get worked out going forward. And then would you guys be willing to do one more meeting where we could discuss that? And then, I know we're imposing on you a lot, but discuss that and maybe then get a recommendation that goes forward to the audit subcommittee.
And while we kind of polled the representative people here, we didn't ask each of you agency reps if you had a oh horrors no kind of reaction. So be sure that as we convene again, then if you have any cautions on the direction we seem to be headed, that you would please bring that to the next meeting.
Yes, definitely. And I want to thank, on behalf of the board, I want to really thank the expert panel and Marilyn.
Yes, that was very helpful.
And all of you. It was great to get the background and the perspective and from each of you, and it's really helpful for the board as we wrestle with the accountability issues going forward on our program. Thank you very much.